So, what does Gus Malzahn do for an encore? Mark Rogers TV looking at every Power 5 conference schedule in college football heading into 2014. We've cleaned out the SEC Eastern Division, done Alabama. Now we look at arch rival Auburn. The Tigers, to me, had the greatest turnaround in the history of college football last season. I know that's a bold, big statement I'm making there, but 0-8 in the SEC in 2012, getting blown out in almost all those games. Just 3 wins overall, 2012. Gus Malzahn takes over. They go all the way to the BCS National Championship game. In the SEC, lost just 1 game, defeated Missouri in the championship game. Again, 1 drive away from winning it all and going from doormat of the SEC, 0-8, all the way to SEC champion in 1 year. If you've got a greater turnaround, please offer it up. I would love to look in the history books and see a greater turnaround than Auburn going from 0-8 in the SEC to SEC champion and 1 drive away from the BCS National Championship. Okay, 2014, turn the page, and we've got Arkansas and Auburn on that opening week. So the Tigers open in conference play, much like South Carolina and Texas A&M. That game on the Plains against the Razorbacks, who finished 3-9 and 0-8 in the SEC. Sounds familiar. We don't expect that kind of turnaround from the Razorbacks. We did expect Auburn to get much better than 3-9, but not all the way to the BCS championship game. So Auburn, Arkansas, Tigers will be a huge favorite on opening day. Then they have an out-of-conference game, not against a heavyweight, but I credit this game for the Auburn Tigers in taking on a very, very fine San Jose State program that's produced David Fales at quarterback. He's gone on to the NFL. Ron Carragher, we've interviewed him here on Mark Rogers TV. San Jose State, again, a legitimate program in a non-BCS or non-Power 5 league taking on the Auburn Tigers. So that's not going to be a game that the Tigers can just sleepwalk and coast through. They will be a substantial favorite in that game, probably 20 to 25 points. But again, that's a good early test non-conference. Then Auburn with the open date on September 13th. Dive into an interesting game against a Big 12 power going to Manhattan, Kansas to take on the Wildcats of Kansas State. The Wildcats an interesting program in that Bill Snyder somehow gets it done. Much like Michigan State and Wisconsin, Stanford out west, Bill Snyder continues to recruit in the 40 to 45 range, something in that range. The recruiting rankings come out, and you got to go way down the list to find Kansas State. But he goes the JUCO route, and he coaches them up. They fit his system. He doesn't just have the eye for talent, but he is the eye for specific Kansas State type of talent to fit his program. And Kansas State wins football games. Last season, they got off to the rough start, lost to a non-FBS school early in the season, I believe in game 1 in the opener, then really came on, gave Baylor one of its toughest tests of the season, defeated Michigan in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. So Kansas State at 9-4 last season will be a tough test on the road for Auburn. Again, the Tigers substantial favorite, much better talent than Kansas State, but that's a true test because Kansas State's going to be tough again this season. Auburn at Kansas State, look out for that game at the end of September. Then Louisiana Tech at home. LSU, Mississippi State, probably the toughest 2-game stretch. No doubt the toughest 2-game stretch for Auburn, LSU, then Mississippi State. The Tigers lost their only game at LSU last season. This time they've got them on the Plains on October 4th. Then they've got to go to Mississippi State. That is not a gimme. Remember that even though Auburn was SEC champion and Mississippi State struggled to get to postseason play last season, the Mississippi State had that game won on the Plains at Auburn last season before the Tigers pulled it out in the last second. Sammy Coates with the game-winning touchdown, I believe, against Mississippi State. Another open date, then South Carolina. So if you've heard our schedule previews here on Mark Rogers TV, specifically looking at the SEC, it is key to look at who that particular team is playing in the other division. So, of course, Auburn's got the same exact schedule as all their rivals in the SEC Western Division, except for those 2 games in the other division. So for Alabama, and you know I've got a big gripe on this one, not against Alabama, but against the SEC and the way the SEC schedules. Alabama's got Tennessee and Florida. Tennessee and Florida both went 2-6 in the SEC last season. That's a combined 4-12. Auburn, Their two non-division games are South Carolina, possibly the best team in the SEC East, probably the best last year, even though Mizzou won the East. South Carolina coming off an 11-2 campaign, may not be quite as good, losing all that defense and Connor Shaw, but South Carolina, and then the cross-division rivalry against Georgia. So they've always got Georgia. This year they've got to go to Athens between the hedges to take on the Bulldogs. So those are two extremely tough games. Two teams that went a combined 11-5 last season in the SEC in South Carolina and Georgia. I would expect them to do a little bit better, maybe a game or two better than that combined in the SEC this season, versus chief rival Alabama taking on Tennessee and Florida, combined 4-12 in the SEC. That's the scheduling nightmare in the SEC. That's it right there. That boils it down. When you only play 8 conference games and 6 are exactly the same against a division foe, then those 2 are that much of a difference. Alabama taking on 2 4-12 teams, and then Auburn taking on a combined South Carolina and Georgia going 11-5. That's a huge difference in scheduling. Okay, again, after the open date, South Carolina at Ole Miss, Texas A&M at Georgia. That's a rough stretch. South Carolina, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Georgia for the Auburn Tigers. Then they've got a bit of a bye against Samford at home before they gear up to go to Tuscaloosa to take on the Crimson Tide. And, of course, Alabama's going to be even more motivated, if that's possible, in the Iron Bowl against Auburn to avenge that 31-30 defeat that cost them a shot at the SEC and the BCS championship last season. So, in evaluating the Auburn schedule, I think they've got a tough road in the non-division games against South Carolina and at Georgia compared to what their rivals face, most notably Alabama. And I'm going to credit their non-conference schedule. They don't play a heavyweight. They don't play Oklahoma, USC, or Ohio State, somebody like that. But at Kansas State's a tough game. And then their second game is much tougher than most teams in the SEC, or some teams in the SEC, when you talk about San Jose State coming to Auburn. The other games, Louisiana Tech and Samford, should be wins. So Auburn should go 4-0 non-conference. At the very least, they're going to go 3-1. But I expect them to go to Kansas State, win that game. Then I look at a 6-2 record, most likely in the SEC. There's no doubt that they could lose 4 games against the schedule. Trip up at Manhattan, Kansas against Kansas State. Lose a game possibly against LSU or Mississippi State. South Carolina at home. Ole Miss is going to be tough on the road. Alabama, of course, and Georgia. That could be a 4-loss season, easily. But I'm expecting Auburn to come through with 9 or 10 wins. We will peg our prediction a little bit later in the summer when we size up fall camp and really look at the personnel for the Auburn Tigers. Auburn fans, please chime in on the schedule. Tough date at Kansas State, South Carolina, and also Georgia, of course. Highlight the non-division games. Then you've got Alabama to finish, as usual, in the Iron Bowl with a trip to Mississippi State, going to be tough, and a trip to Ole Miss as well. And it all starts against the Arkansas Razorbacks on August 30th, right here on Mark Rogers TV.